Hi there, my name is Justin Hibbard and welcome to Politics in Plain English. Thanks so much for tuning in. Today's question is, what's an omnibus and why do they exist? Before I get to that question, if you're new to Politics in Plain English, what I do is I take complex political ideas and current events and break them down so they're easy to understand and digest in an explanation that's 18 minutes or less. I take out the hyper emotion, the spin, try to stick with data and facts, presenting all sides fairly. My goal is that you become an informed voter because I believe that an informed voter is the most powerful voter and the ideal of democracy. If you haven't done so, would you do me a huge favor and subscribe? You can subscribe to the Politics in Plain English podcast wherever you get your podcasts. I also do a video of these podcasts, which you can find on my YouTube channel, Justin R. Hibbard, and that's my handle as well on Facebook and Twitter. Just search for Justin R. Hibbard, and you can follow me there as well. Lastly, I try and do a podcast episode once each week, but I do a lot more writing. If you like to get my articles in your inbox, you can subscribe at justinrhibbard.substack.com. Thanks so much for doing that. Now let's get back to our question at hand. What's an omnibus and why do they exist? As of the time of this recording, Congress has just passed an omnibus bill right before their 2020 Christmas recess. At nearly 5,600 pages, it's actually the largest bill in American history. The bill comprises of $900 billion in stimulus relief from COVID-19, but it's couched in a larger spending bill of $1.4 trillion. Now, if you read the bill, you'll discover that there's lots of various pieces of spending and legislation there. There's, of course, details about direct stimulus paychecks to Americans, as well as unemployment payments, which we would expect in a stimulus package. But there's a whole lot of other stuff. For example, there's details about funding 2 new Smithsonians, a 3% military pay raise, money for a new attack submarine, and legislation like making it a felony to illegally stream videos and music with a prison sentence of up to 10 years. What does that have to do with the stimulus package? The answer is absolutely nothing. Packing a bill, though, with all sorts of extra legislation spending is nothing new. In fact, there's a term for it. It's called pork barreling, which dates back to the 1870s. Pork barreling is slipping in legislation that benefits one particular congressman or district into a much larger piece of legislation. An omnibus is similar. Originally, the word was used to talk about a bunch of books packed into one volume. However, in politics, the word omnibus is used to refer to the cramming of multiple pieces of legislation into one single bill. Why would Congress do this? Why not pass all these similar legislation pieces separately? The answer is because they can, and many times it actually benefits the author of the bill to do it this way. Let me explain. Let's take one particular part of this legislation in this particular 2020 omnibus. How about the part that says that age verification is required when receiving a shipment of e-cigarette products? Yeah, it has nothing to do with stimulus, but it is part of this omnibus bill. Now, if a member of Congress wanted to pass this bill, they would first write it up and then file it for consideration. The majority leader of the House of Representatives and the majority leader of the Senate gets to decide what gets put on the agenda in their respective chambers. So if a senator wanted to progress their bill, they'd have to convince the majority leader to even bring this to the Senate floor for discussion, debate, and hopefully get the bill approved to move to a committee review. The process would be similar in the House of Representatives, where the majority leader of the House decides the agenda. You may have seen the video "I'm Just a Bill" from a 1976 episode of Schoolhouse Rock, and if you haven't, I've included it in the notes. The video shows just how complicated and arduous it is to get legislation passed through both chambers of Congress and then signed into law by the president. As I mentioned in a previous episode, many people get extremely frustrated over Congress's inability to get legislation passed. But what people forget is that our government wasn't set up to be efficient. Our founding fathers had an efficient government in the form of a monarchy, where the king made all the decisions. Our founding fathers wanted a government very different, and so they created a constitutional democratic republic where compromise was essential. And in order to get a bill passed, you have to have a lot of compromise. So why is it sometimes easier to get this enormous omnibus to pass through Congress than much smaller focus pieces of legislation? The answer is compromise. You may have heard of the term a whip, as in a majority or a minority whip. These are the leaders in Congress who try to whip up the votes. In other words, they try to get people to vote for certain pieces of legislation. So they go around to other members in Congress and say, hey, what will it get you to vote for this bill? There's tons of wheeling and dealing that happens. The leader might offer a position on a committee, or they might offer a pork barrel inside of a legislation. For example, they might say, hey, if you vote for this, we'll include something you're passionate about, such as age verification upon e-cigarette deliveries. And when you look at all the various pieces of legislation in this omnibus, that's exactly what happened. Congress needed to act fast. They were about to go on Christmas break. The new Congress is set to begin on January 6th. The government is on the verge of a shutdown, and there's still many people suffering economically from this pandemic. So in order to get people to vote in a hurry, the leaders had to sweeten the pot, if you will. Both the Democratic and Republican leaders of the House and Senate were likely working on this for a while. What will it get you, your side, to vote for this? They probably asked. And the closer to the deadline they got, the more desperate they got. The leaders didn't have the bill completed until just 2 hours before Congress was set to vote on it. That meant there was no way to read the whopping 5,600 pages of legislation before voting on it. However, the bill ended up receiving overwhelming bipartisan support. Why? How can someone in good conscience vote for a bill they haven't read? The answer is they didn't need to. They didn't need to read it all. They just needed to know that the legislation that they wanted got included in the overall package. That was the deal. They got their pet project in that bill in exchange for their yes vote. I promise that in politics in plain English, I would try and do justice to all the different sides. So let's look at this from Congress's point of view. The relationship between the executive and the legislative branches and between the parties have deteriorated and have become highly partisan and divisive. So it's likely Congress and the president won't agree on even the smallest pieces of legislation. They'll spin their wheels, getting a bill to go only so far, but never to the point of actually becoming a law. So by not passing individual pieces of legislation and waiting to put them in an omnibus, it all becomes bargaining chips. Why bring up a bill if there's no way of getting it to pass? Why not just hold off until someone needs your vote? It's actually sort of an efficient way of legislating. However, on the other side, it's easy to criticize this form of legislation. Stuffing random bills into a larger omnibus means that the individual pieces of legislation don't get debated, they don't get massaged, and they can slip in without anyone knowing. How will anyone actually enforce laws that they don't know exist? Well, how might we fix this? The easiest way probably would be to pass some sort of law that said that everything contained in a bill had to be related to the problem the piece of legislation was trying to solve. But let's be honest, that statement alone is full of potential loopholes. Another solution, and even more challenging one, is that it's really up to us voters. I always believe that a democracy reflects its electorate. The reason why Congress fails to compromise on the little things is because they get their cues from us, and we run to our highly partisan news networks, which just create echo chambers, and we act bitterly divisive towards the opposite party of our choice. My encouragement is for you to do a few things. First, read through bills working their way through Congress. Don't just dismiss something because it has a Democratic sponsor or a Republican sponsor. Really consider the bill for its own merit. Secondly, if a bill isn't perfect, think of changes you might make to make it more appealing. And third, and this is most important, contact your congressional representatives and encourage others to do the same. As an elected official, I can tell you personally that the most impact you'll have on your representative isn't to complain about them on social media. It's to contact them directly, talk with them politely, and advocate for their vote on a piece of legislation that is meaningful to you. Thanks for taking the time to tune into Politics in Plain English. If you liked what you heard, could you do me a huge favor and subscribe and maybe even give it a 5-star rating? You can find Politics in Plain English on your favorite podcast provider. The video cast is on my YouTube channel, Justin R. Hibbard. You can follow me on Facebook and Twitter. Hey, it's all the same handle, Justin R. Hibbard. And lastly, I'll try and do a podcast and vodcast once each week, but I do a lot more writing throughout the week. You can subscribe and get my latest article in your inbox at justinrhibbard.substack.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. My name is Justin Hibbard, and this is Politics in Plain English.